Good evening. My name is Sandra Fritz. I'm the chairperson of the Shrewsbury School Committee, and welcome to our meeting of April 10th. Tonight's meeting is being broadcast live on Selco Channels 29 and 329, and it's also streamed live on Shrewsbury Media Connections website. I'd like to thank Liz Poplowski from SMC, who's helping with our meeting this evening. First on the agenda is public participation. No one has asked to address the committee this evening. However, in the future, if anybody wants to join us for this portion, you can contact us at schoolcommittee@shrewsbury.k12.ma.us. Next is chairperson and members' reports. Rachel.
I can respond to anything. I wanted to thank the district and for the elementary schools for providing our kids with Eclipse glasses for this week. It was a historic event for those students to witness, and as my youngest said, this was real life science that she got to see. So I hear that it was very fun at each of the viewing locations, but I appreciate giving these kids the opportunity to go out and see the real life science.
Thank you. Anyone else? No? I'd like to announce under the Shrewsbury High School Statement of Interest, Dr. Sawyer had made a recommendation to the school committee that we submit a statement of interest for the Shrewsbury High School to add an addition due to overcrowding. And that is something that has to have a majority vote of the school committee as well as the select board. The school committee voted unanimously back in March to push that forward, and last night the select board voted 3-2 in favor of pushing that statement of interest forward. So we will be able to meet our deadline on April 12th and have that hopefully put into the pipeline for the Massachusetts School Building Authority. And I believe we won't hear about that until the end of the year. It takes quite a while. So, but we're very happy that this was a positive vote and that we can try to get this project going and into the pipeline. So thank you to my school committee members and the select board for that. Next is superintendent's report.
Thank you, Ms. Fritz. I did want to mention that last week we celebrated National Paraprofessional Appreciation Day. Our paraprofessionals are absolutely a key part of our staff in supporting our students each day across the district in a variety of different roles, from instructional assistants to ABA technicians, helping with our students who are typically on the autism spectrum, to literacy tutors, and just a variety of roles, media aides. We're just very fortunate to have a very dedicated and skilled group of folks across the district who work really hard to support our students and our educators, and we appreciate them. So I wanted to mention that as to start off. Also wanted to certainly a couple of really good news stories from our music program. We have been named by the NAM Foundation, which is a National Music Foundation, as a best community for music education. It's a national designation that communities get across the U.S. based on the overall excellence of our school's music program. So I want to just acknowledge everyone associated. And really, it's not only about our educators, but also about the support we get from the SSMA, the parent group who supports us, how the way the schools and the administration support it. There's a whole variety of things that Mr. O'Toole, Tom O'Toole, the Director of Performing Arts, had to submit. So it's excellent to get that designation. I also wanted to congratulate Oak Middle School has select performance groups, and they participated in the Massachusetts Instrumental and Choral Conductors Association, known as MICA, competition this past week. And all three select groups from Oak earned medals. The Oak Select Orchestra earned the silver medal, and then the Oak Select Band and the Oak Select Choir both earned gold medals. My understanding is the first time the band has earned that designation. So congratulations to everyone associated with those programs, the teachers and the student musicians and singers. And then finally, and I mentioned this in the reminder that went about this meeting, we're very proud, an example of lifelong learning and certainly lifelong commitment to their craft and their profession, or in this case, in the music side of things, Mr. O'Toole, our Director of Performing Arts, has composed an original composition called The Ride, which honors Major Taylor, the famous African-American cyclist champion who lived in Worcester for much of his life. And he is going to be conducting the world premiere of that piece at the Worcester Polytechnic Institute's Concert Band and Brass Ensemble Spring Concert, which is taking place on April 20th. And in the message I sent out, there's a link to that flyer if anyone's interested in attending. But congratulations to Mr. O'Toole And it's wonderful for him setting that kind of example as not only the educator and administrative lead in the department, but continuing to have, be directly involved with music composition and conducting outside of the schools. And finally, just want to wish everyone who's part of our school community who of the Muslim faith who is celebrating Eid al-Fitr today and last evening began, and the end of Ramadan, and we hope they're having a joyous holiday. And that is Superintendent's report this evening.
Thank you, Dr. Sawyer. Our first timed scheduled appointment this evening is a report from the Shrewsbury High School Student Advisory Committee. Under the Massachusetts Education Reform Act, school districts are required to have a student advisory committee consisting of 5 high school members who are elected by the student body, and they're here with us tonight, if you'd like to come forward. And we also have with us Mr. Andrew Smith, who is their long-term serving advisor. If you'd like to introduce yourselves once you get all set for those at home.
Hello, everyone. My name is Siri Aral, and I'm the chairperson of the Student Advisory Committee. Thank you all so much for having us here today to share our agenda. My fellow members will now go down the line and introduce themselves.
My name's Caroline, I'm a junior.
My name is Venkata and I'm a senior.
My name is Noah, I'm also a junior.
We'll begin today with student life. With the school year well into the second semester, the student body is getting ready for the end of the year.
Juniors have been exceptionally busy these last couple of weeks. The AP tests coming up, SAT and SAT, club leadership, and school-wide elections, as well as other spring sports beginning. In the midst of chaos, however, I, as well as many of my peers, are glad we have many school events to look forward to.
As we enter the final quarter of the year, the freshmen, sophomores, and juniors have all been taking on election season, with positions ranging from class officers to student council to our very own student advisory committee. The SHS community is a mix of both nerves and excitement. We're looking forward to seeing more from our potential school leaders.
As the end of the year is approaching, lots is happening for students. Seniors and juniors are starting to review for AP classes. Underclassmen are starting to think about MCAS and finals for the first time, and everyone is looking forward to the end of the year.
It's hard to believe that us seniors only have one more quarter of high school left. Many students have received college decisions or are seeking out alternative pathways for the future, marking the shift to the next step of our lives. However, we still haven't lost sight of the present, staying focused and enjoying the last few months of high school we have left.
Course selection. Many SHS students are excited to be able to participate in the expanded Project Lead the Way programs. These programs are made of classes that allow students to delve deeply into one profession they are interested in pursuing, such as business, childcare, computer science, or film. These classes are taken either as a pathway starting in 9th or 10th grade, or as individual electives available to all grades. Shrewsbury recently received the Innovation Career Pathway designation from the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education for our engineering and life science programs, making the school eligible for up to $150,000 of additional funding for these 2 programs. Currently, 99 students are signed up to pursue the engineering program, and 165 are registered for the biomedical pathway. Many students are very glad they will finally be able to double up in science courses.
Overcrowding. Following the idea of overcrowding coming up at the last SAC meeting, we began observing this situation in SHS. Particularly at the intersections with the math and English wings of the school, the number of students in the hallways during passing periods is immense. With the implementation of 4 lunches, overcrowding in our lunches has significantly eased, but we still notice a lack of sufficient space at times. Additionally, during school-wide events such as the Black History Assembly and Spirit Rallies, the space we have is unable to accommodate every student in the same manner.
Next up, we have co-curriculars, where SHS students have had a great time getting involved with co-curriculars outside of school.
Sports. Excuse me. After closing off the winter season in the first few weeks of March, the spring season is now off to a strong start. Following the tryout phase, 495 SHS students are now registered to play for a team. Additionally, the Friends of Shrewsbury crew began their annual raffle fundraiser, raising over $4,000 in the first week alone. The team was also given a brand new 4-boat named Moon River.
Speech and debate. The Shrewsbury Speech and Debate team is in the final stretch of their season, just wrapping up their last tournaments in the past few weeks. Not only did the team win the SHS-hosted tournament of Mardi Gras back in March, but they also held on to their second place standing in the entire state of Massachusetts, featuring state championships from 2 students. The team is now preparing for the most prestigious tournaments in the nation, sending 32 team members to Chicago for NCFL Grand Nationals in May and 11 students to Iowa for NSDA Nationals in June.
In March, two of our school's largest clubs competed at the state level and thrived at the events. Shrewsbury's DECA Club was one of the most successful chapters there, with 60 people qualifying for state competition and 20 of those members being state finalists or champions. The club's growth and success were further exemplified by Shrewsbury winning an award for the largest chapter percentage of all Mass DECA clubs. The other club was Shrewsbury's hosted chapter, an opportunity for students to meet health professionals and challenge themselves against their peers. Shrewsbury competed with over 90 people in states, and 21 of those students are moving on to internationals. We're excited to see how many more milestones the students will reach.
Science Fair. On February 12th, 36 students participated at the local science fair featuring projects from innovative motion detection sensors to new models that further drug discovery that they have been working on since the start of this year. Of these 36, 12 students moved on to the regional fair that took place on March 8th at WPI. Of those, 4 placed at the Massachusetts Science Fair.
Next up, we'll be talking about events at SHS, where students have been finding ways to strengthen the SHS community through a variety of different events.
Class events. Throughout the past weeks, each class has been bonding and raising money through numerous events. On March 7th, seniors had their senior breakfast before school, where they participated in raffles and began their 50-day countdown, celebrating their achievements throughout high school. Also on March 7th, the sophomore class held a volleyball tournament as a fundraiser, and on March 13th, the sophomore class did the same with the dodgeball tournament. Both events were completely organized by class officers and advisors and were incredibly successful in bringing the SHS community together.
Musical. Our theater department put on Little Shop of Horrors this March to an ecstatic audience. The show was an excellent send-off for our seniors and a great entertainment to the audience, with hit musical pieces and accompaniment from SHS students backstage. In total, over 100 students participated in the musical, and over 1,400 people came to see the show.
Coffee House. On March 22nd, SHS hosted one of the most attended after-school events of the year, Coffee House. Organized by the National Honor Society, we had close to 40 incredible performances from both groups and soloists, including our very own SHS Jazz Band. The event ultimately raised over $1,400 for charity, and like always, did a fantastic job of celebrating the talent within our student body.
Black History Assembly. In honor of Black History Month and our diverse community at SHS, the Black History Committee once again hosted its annual Black History Assembly on February 14th. This year, the Assembly's theme was highlighting Black innovators throughout history, including their technological breakthroughs and social movements that have helped us live our lives. The talents of our students were showcased through poetry, art pieces, and multiple memorable performances during the Assembly. We'd also like to thank members of the school committee for attending the Assembly and continuing to support our school community.
Asian Culture Night. On Saturday, April 6th, Shrewsbury High School celebrated the annual Asian Culture Night. They had various performances ranging from the South Asian dance team doing a fusion of Indian dance forms to the SHS Vietnamese Student Association doing a fan dance. Students were also able to learn about various cultures and enjoy catered food from local restaurants King Chef and Punjabi Grill. This event was a huge hit with 230 students in attendance, allowing for the club to raise over $2,000. It is exciting to see how the SHS community was able to come together and celebrate everyone's cultural differences.
And thank you all for your continuous support of the Student Advisory Committee.
Thank you. Questions or comments? Lindsay?
I always appreciate this. It's good to know. I now have a high schooler in my house, so I get a little bit of a flavor for some of these pieces at home. But do just want to really highlight a couple of things that you said, and I'm kind of at the top of your agenda here. The Project Lead the Way and the innovation pathways certainly are quite an investment on behalf of many people across the district. I will particularly, of course, call out our principal and our assistant superintendent, Jane Lazat, as being really instrumental in moving that forward. But I had not yet heard that would resulted in the numbers that you shared. Those are I think I was sitting here fingers crossed. Like, I hope a lot of people are interested in it, and so it sounds like there is. And nor had I really appreciated that those pathways allowed for the potential doubling up of science courses, and that had been seen as a restriction. So and that people are enthused about it, which is also great. All very, very, very great news. So, it's interesting to me also how that dovetails into the issues around overcrowding, that there's been a lot of work and logistics to figure out how to offer these things in a space that is so constrained. And so there are either certain things that we can't do at some times or other ways that expansions are tricky. So I'm always glad when I hear that the time and intention and investments that we're making are also appreciated by the students, because we don't always get that right, or think we're helping, and we're not always sure that the students are appreciating that as well. So do you know of, is it really incoming freshmen and sophomores who are excited about some of these opportunities? But maybe you could speak to whether upperclassmen are kind of chatting about this as well.
So a lot of upperclassmen are very excited to be able to take the courses. They can't take the full pathway because it's 3 classes. And so 9th and 10th graders are put into the beginning of the pathway first, and then it's backfilled with juniors and seniors. But a lot of them are very excited to take the biomedical sciences in particular, especially those looking for a career in the medical field, especially as a way to show colleges that they are very interested in that particular niche.
That's great. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Good. Thank you again. I think it's always important for us to hear directly from the students, because you really know what's happening. And just because we're adults, we don't know better for sure. And I think hearing from the students is a way for us to make sure that what we're supporting financially or programmatically is the right thing. And I was also surprised at the numbers for these classes, and I'm really glad to hear that. I think these are ways for any student to look at, maybe this is what I want to study in college, but maybe I'm not going to it after I took this one class or 2 classes. So it's very good to hear, and it's gratifying for us that we're hearing it directly from the students that it is working. And one question around the overcrowding, because I know you mentioned the 4 lunches, but what time is the first lunch? It isn't pretty early.
11 something, right?
I can double check.
Like 10:45.
I thought it was like before 11
Yeah.
o'clock.
Yeah, most of the time it's like, so we have like a 7-day period sometimes, and that one, it'll start at 10:58, but on most days it starts at 10:48.
Okay, so it's early, before 11 o'clock, and I think, if I could probably eat then, that'd be fine, but it's it's just not really optimal to have a lunch that early or somebody really late. And we actually all had been on a tour of the high school. One of the select board members had asked a tour to see about the overcrowding and the use of rooms, and it was eye-opening for us, even though we know a lot about what's going on in the schools. It was very eye-opening, and I can understand why it's difficult to navigate the school, and maybe not to get all the courses you want from an elective perspective, because it's just so many students, we don't have room to add any more classes. So it was good for us, but I am, again, going back to this, Project Lead the Way, very happy to hear that it's working. And hopefully, as we move forward, we can add even more along these types of categories for everybody. So thank you. Dr. Soria?
I want to thank the SAC for their report as always, and appreciate all the information. I think the range of things you talked about shows the breadth of the experiences that our students are able to have at Shrewsbury High School, and both from academics, that's the primary mission of the school, of course, but also the various academic competition teams, and a couple of newer ones that have been meeting with a lot of success as far as DECA and HOSA, and ongoing success around science fair and speech and debate and those pieces. I think that when we see our students acquit themselves really well in these regional and state competitions, and even going beyond that to nationals, it's really speaks highly of the quality of the work and preparation that they do, and that are supported, of course, by the coaches and advisors who support them. And there's a lot of work that goes into that, and we appreciate all the people who are supporting those programs so our students can participate. And then similarly, whether it's from the honor societies or the different clubs, just the range of things that are happening in terms of cultural and student-driven performances like Coffee House or Asian Culture Night or the Black History Assembly. These are things that really enrich the culture and the climate of the school community. And I think it's really, underscores our goal to make sure that all students feel that they're included and that they belong in our high school community, no matter what their background is and no matter what their own personal culture is, and that all of us get to benefit from learning about those different cultures and different talents that our students have and share with one another, which is terrific. So really appreciate, that doesn't happen without a lot of work on the part of the students themselves and the educators and staff who are supporting them. We're really proud of what's happened at Shrewsbury High School, and it's really something, again, that we should be celebrating while we address the variety of challenges that we all experience. We're going to talk about that in our next report because, there are things that we are continuing to be challenged by in this environment right now in public education, but there is much to celebrate, and we appreciate you pointing out a variety of things that are working well and people are experiencing. So thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Next on the agenda, we are going to have a clinical services report. Tonight, we have with us Meg Belcito, our Assistant Superintendent for Student Services, Megan Bartlett, Assistant Director for Special Education, Jamie Millette, Director of Mental Health and Counseling, and Nicole Bradley, our Clinical Coordinator. And they will be providing us with a report on the mental and behavioral health services in the school district.
Good evening, nice to see you all.
Welcome.
Let me just get this.
And unfortunately, Ms. Bartlett wasn't able to join us tonight, but our other professionals here will be presenting the
I got the
information.
password. There we go. All right. So thank you for having us tonight. And as you see, Jamie, our Director of Counseling and Mental Health, is here, as well as Nicole Bradley, our Clinical Coordinator, and who is also working through her administrative license to be an administrator in special education. So this is also part of the learning process for that piece of her profession. So we're excited that Nicole is venturing into the world of administration as well. So,
All right. Thank you for having us back out for the, seems like an annual spring event that I come back out and provide some information to you guys. So thank you for having us. We're going to go over a variety of things. It's definitely a more condensed version than last year when I had a lot of updates in my first year. So we have Nicole here to share one of the highlights, I think, from the clinical department through our elementary transitions program. But I do want to take a moment just to highlight, as Dr. Sawyer just said, we've had a variety of challenges this year. In different ways than I think we've experienced in public education. We've been through the pandemic, we've done the hybrid learning, the remote learning. It's just been different in terms of the mental health field in terms of public education. So I just want to highlight it's been a total team effort between building administrators, district leaders, directors, nurses, CSAs, ABA techs, teachers, you name it. It's been a team effort supporting our kids. And I definitely want to acknowledge the outstanding work that the clinical department has done this year. We've had some challenging situations, and they're really doing some outstanding work that we're going to highlight here tonight. All right, so we're going to start with some data points, and we'll start with some mental health screeners. Just a quick review. I know I went over this quite a bit last year, but the purpose of why we do screeners is to really proactively identify students. So screeners are offered at a tier 1 level. Every kid has the opportunity to do a screener. Obviously, parents have the opportunity to opt their children out, but we run a variety of screeners in the district. So we do mental health screeners. That's really looking at the burden of psychological symptoms that interfere with the student's ability to succeed and learn. We also do some SEL screeners. Those are those panorama screeners that Dr. Lazat is heading and we'll talk more about. But those are really looking at the SEL competencies and what we want our students to learn to participate and interact effectively. So they do screen 2 different areas, but we're doing a variety of screeners with our kiddos, which is a really great way, like I said, to proactively identify kids and then also make some recommendations. So in terms of looking at our triangle, typically from a screener, we're looking at offering some tier 2 supports. So that could be just connecting with a school adjustment counselor or a school psychologist. I think that's one of the biggest takeaways from a screener is connecting kids with a trusted adult. I think that's one of the most powerful interventions that you get. But we also can encourage kids to utilize coping strategies they might already have in their toolbox. We may start doing some follow-up. Might not be like a full-fledged counseling, but they may do some check-ins with a student. We also may provide them some information on Interface or the Mass Behavioral Health Line. And then we also have some tier 2 groups that are running as well to target symptoms related to anxiety and depression, which is 2 of our screeners. So the first table here looks at our GAD-7 screener. We piloted this last year at the 7th grade level at Oak. So we did it again this year in January and February. We had 405 students screened, about 6% screened in. So what that means is we created a threshold based on a score. So any student that screened in at a high, moderate to severe level of anxiety had to follow up with a counselor. Of those kiddos, we had 10 students who opted in to do a tier 2 group utilizing a cognitive behavioral therapy framework. So it's a short-term group, it runs 10 sessions and really targets symptoms related to anxiety. I'll get into it a little bit further about some of the professional development opportunities that we had in the department, but we have tier 2 CBT groups utilizing the Trails to Wellness curriculum across many grade levels, which is a really awesome. I've had some experience with it myself as a school adjustment counselor. I think it's really student-friendly, and it's offered for kiddos elementary all the way up to high school. The next table here is looking at the brief adolescent screen for depression. This is a screener that is paired with our SOS, the Signs of Suicide curriculum, that is given to 6th, 8th, and then 9th through 11th graders. It is typically delivered in a health classroom as part of the health curriculum, and then we have school adjustment counselors and school counselors at the high school supporting the follow-up, and then also supporting the screening development. And also the protocol and procedure in terms of how do we follow up with kids effectively and efficiently. So we have here the grid for 6th, 8th, and then the high schoolers. If you look at the high school numbers, we have the second half actually taking this in the spring, and they're actually getting screened following April vacation. So we'll have another, probably I think 500 students taking the screener then. But numbers are pretty consistent. We have 2 different types of follow-up. So based on the questions and how students answer. It depends on how quickly we follow up with students. So students requiring same-day follow-up are endorsing some sort of suicidal ideation in the past 4 weeks. They may also say yes to a question that asks about, have you ever in your whole life attempted suicide? So if students answer yes to either of those 2 questions, they automatically get screened in. They get follow-up with a counselor within the day, by the end of the school day. Parents are also usually looped in, and we have a phone call with parents as well. And then we also have a 48-hour follow-up, which is for students that screen at a higher level in terms of a score. So they might not answer yes to one of those 2 questions, but they have an elevated score, which all that means is that there might be a likelihood of depression-related symptoms. So we want to have a conversation with those kids as well. Moving along to the Regional Youth Health Survey, I just wanted to highlight some of the information that we received this year. So this is a survey, not a screener, just to be really clear. Students' names are not collected. This is information that gives us key insights to health behaviors and experiences that are impacting students' well-being. We're actually in the 5th cycle here in Shrewsbury, started in 2015. Last year's data that I had shared with you guys was from the 2021 data points. So if you look on this slide, the percentages that are in parentheses are actually the 2021 numbers, just for comparison. So the good news here is that we are seeing a decline. 2021 was a tough year coming right out of the pandemic, so we did see inflated scores across a lot of different studies, not just through the RYHS, but also CDC studies. NAMI did some studies. Everything was pretty inflated after the pandemic. So we are seeing a decline. I will say, this highlights how important the work is that we do here in the schools. There's studies that say 1 in 6 youth experience a mental health condition or symptoms, and only half receive treatment, which, for better or for worse, schools are an opportunity for us to intervene proactively and at least get kids treatment ready, at the very least, if not providing therapeutic intervention. All right, so moving along to some clinical department data. Wanted to give a quick overview of what the department looks like. So staffing has not changed. We still have 35 FTE clinicians throughout the department, but we do have 2 kind of asterisks here. If you're looking at Floral, we were operating with 2 clinicians, 1 school adjustment counselor, 1 school psychologist this year. Just had an open position, unable to fill this year for a school psychologist. And also at Sherwood, we've had a vacancy in the school psychologist position since December. So we've had some holes to fill in terms of school psychologists and testing needs and evaluation needs. But looking at ratios, we're still doing pretty well. The American School Counselors Association recommends 250 to 1 for student to counselor ratio, and we're doing okay. If you look at this, the high school may appear to be slightly out of ratio, but we also have school counselors, formerly guidance counselors, also there to support students. Not included on this table are our clinical coordinators. So I have some fun data to share, thanks to August Schools. So we transitioned into an electronic health record platform, which was new. We haven't had anything like this in the district before, so there has been a learning curve in terms of onboarding and getting clinicians comfortable with the platform and utilizing it, efficiently and making sure we're coding things right. But we're able to look at how many students across the district have been encountered at least once. And that encounter could be a consultation with a teacher, could be a direct service, could be a crisis or emergency intervention, or it could be a collateral contact with a parent or guardian or outside provider. So encounter is really an umbrella term for a variety of ways that a school adjustment counselor, a school psychologist, or a clinical coordinator may come in contact with a student. But looking at the numbers, when we were able to run a report as of April 1st, we're looking at about 55% of our student body had been connected, encountered in some way with a clinical staff member. And then you'll see on the right-hand side is a breakdown, elementary, middle, and high school. Parker Road data isn't included here, only because Deb Cushman's role down there is just very different with the little ones. She's encountering those kids daily in and out of classrooms. So I did a little bit of a deeper dive with the August data to really look at a little bit more of a breakdown of, what are we providing for Tier 2 and Tier 3 supports for kids. So by looking at the frequency of encounters, we can hypothesize the level of intensity of support that the kids need. So, looking at 8 or more encounters for the year, and also keeping in mind, we started the hard on board of this in October. We had a soft start in September. I wanted clinicians to get familiar with the platform, practice utilizing it, and then we started October 1st. So we're actually a month short in terms of data collection. Next year we'll have a full school year to look at. But I ballparked any student who'd been, encountered 8 or more times, probably looking like a Tier 2 intervention. That could be short-term counseling, drop-in as needed support, or it could be some of that short-term group work. The students with 20 or more encounters, we're looking at more of a Tier 3 intervention. So that's more of that longer-term counseling. That could be students that are in our BRIGHT program. Maybe they're getting clinical coordinator support and intervention. Could be IEP service delivery, may just be general ed kids. So taking a look at those numbers across our levels. I will say, and you'll see some additional data points, we have experienced higher levels of intense need at our elementary school and middle school as well. So you'll see when we get to the slide by building of caseload, I think the caseload numbers look similar to last year, but the intensity is much different. Here's looking at an average caseload by level. So we have a breakdown here of Tier 1 and Tier 2. So if you combine Tier 2 and Tier 3 supports that clinicians are providing, you have an average caseload side at the elementary level of about 27 kids. At the middle school, it's about 65. A lot of those kids are really just monitored. They're drop-ins. Those are not kids that are being seen every single day, or every week, I should say. And at the high school, we're looking at about 37 students on a caseload. If you break that down a little bit further on the next slide, I looked at average Tier 3 caseload, and I broke it down by building. So visually, this graph goes from smallest size school to largest. So we range anywhere from the average Tier 3 caseload at Spring Street of about 8 students, with a max of, at Oak, about 29. But it is important to note how our elementary schools kind of match up to our larger size buildings in this visual. Particularly if you look at Coolidge, their enrollment is 291 students, and Floral's 550, just for relativity of looking at that graph. Sherwood has about 922 students. BRIGHT is another one of our Tier 3 interventions. We have programs across Sherwood, Oak, and the high school. Staffing at Sherwood and Oak, we have one clinical coordinator who's a school adjustment counselor who's split between both buildings. And then we have one academic coordinator, a teacher at Sherwood, and we have one academic tutor at Oak. At the high school, we have one clinical coordinator, a school adjustment counselor, and one academic coordinator who's our teacher. And here are our numbers from Sherwood and Oak in our high school program. Again, I just want to note the number of referrals So we had 75% of the Oak and Sherwood referrals were mental health related, and at the high school it was about 90. The program is designed to support students returning from any sort of long-term absence and transition back to school, so it could be a medical absence or hospitalization or a mental health hospitalization. But a lot of the kids that we are supporting through Bright tend to be a mental health referral right now. Looking at our clinical coordinators, this is just some numbers of a breakdown of caseloads by grade level. So these are our BCBAs that are district-wide. We have 4, and they consult to support staff in implementation of behavioral strategies and prevention and interventions to support struggling students. They are a tier 3 support in terms of looking at like who they are supporting and what level of intensity. I do want to note that Nicole Bradley, as she'll present the ETP program, was reallocated to help support the ETP program. So a lot of these numbers, we've had to reallocate our other 3 clinical coordinators to meet the needs of our students. Looking at numbers compared to last year, we're actually a little bit higher this year. We're at a total of 80 students who have been supported by a coordinator. At March 1st was my, my presentation last year, where my cutoff was for data. We were at 65 students last year. So just another indication of the needs have changed. We continue to consult with Dr. Kim Kuziak, and a UMass fellow who rotates every couple months with her for clinical rounds that serves as a consultation for some cases that we're stuck on, and we're looking for, her consultation. She helps provide resources, also helps us when we're doing things well to give us some positive reinforcement. They're heading on the right track, which is nice. We've also looked to use Kim for some professional development and also some leveled consultation. So I have elementary, middle, and high school groups meeting with her as well. Again, we have 18 total referrals. This is very similar to last year. We actually had 16 total referrals last year, so we're right pretty much on pace of where we were. Next set of data we're going to look at are the emergency responses. So there's times when students are struggling, and if we deem that there is a safety issue to themselves or others, we do have a mental health protocol that was rolled out through some professional development earlier in the fall that staff follow to make sure that we're doing our due diligence to keep kids safe in terms of making clinical recommendations to either EMH over at UMass or utilizing Youth Mobile Crisis. So we have some data points here just to highlight and make sure you guys understand what each color category is. We have that lighter blue on the left-hand side are inpatient hospitalization numbers. Typically, students are referred to an inpatient hospitalization through emergency mental health services. Schools are not making that referral. Sometimes primary care doctors are and pediatricians, but a lot of times this is happening through emergency mental health services. Moving along to the darker blue, that's partial hospitalization. A lot of times that's a step down or maybe in place of, in terms of, if kids don't quite meet criteria for an inpatient stay, that might be something that's offered. Partial programs are still operating virtually. So it does still look a little different. They're starting to move back into person. So I think numbers are down there because a lot of people are opting not to do that because, virtual for any kid is just tough. It's a tough service to access. The orange are our EMH and Youth Mobile referrals. So this could be to UMass, to EMH. That could be, we're doing this in conjunction with parents and they are transporting their child. In some situations, it is not safe for the parent to transport the child, and we are doing a transport, and that's where we're working in conjunction with our school resource officer and the Shrewsbury Police Department and talking about how to transport the student there to get seen and get evaluated. So those are the numbers across the district there. Right now, we have 44 recommendations that we've made to EMH or Youth Mobile. If you look at that in comparison to last year, again, it was on March 1st. We were at 43, so pretty similar. Something to note, though, is that we have had an increase in elementary referrals this year. And then lastly on here are the 51As, which is anytime we, as mandated reporters, make a report to DCF suspected abuse or neglect. So we have, to date, as of April 1st, we had 50 across the district. Last year, we had about 37, so we are increased in that data point. Oh, one other point. Sorry, this is on a separate page. Sorry to go back. I did have some data that was from before I got here. I inherited the data from Noelle Freeman. But to just put it in context in terms of February 2022, we had across the district, it wasn't really broken down by level back then, but we had 24 students who required inpatient hospitalization, and we had 73 students who had been referred to EMH. So we are seeing a decrease since 2022, but still numbers are still pretty significant. Sorry. Moving along to our district social worker, Felicity. So her job has drastically changed with the emergency shelter. So in terms of looking at these numbers, last year, when she presented with me, we're looking at 19 students that were classified as homeless and 21 in foster care. These numbers are as of last week when I asked her for her data. Honestly, these numbers probably look different today. They might look different tomorrow. They change and they're in flux constantly. So she's our McKinney-Vento liaison. She's also our foster care point of contact. But a majority of her job right now is navigating and being a liaison with the emergency shelter and for supporting those students and those families. Clinical department professional development was a priority area from last year. And so we took initiatives to offer a variety of professional development opportunities across the school year. So we started with August schools. We had them do an intro and orientation to staff to learn how to use the platform. We moved along to having Open Sky come in and do a 2-part CBT training with staff to help give them a greater toolbox to utilize for Tier 2 groups to target anxiety and depression. And that was done across 2 dates. First date, we had full clinical department, and then the second time they came back out, they actually catered the training to elementary and then secondary level, because it does look a little bit different depending on what developmental age group you're working with. We continue to use Dr. Kim. She actually came in the fall and did some targeted professional development on clinical documentation best practices, since we were going to move into an electronic health record system. Some of my staff have worked outpatient before and were very familiar. Others have not done it in a long time or have only worked in a school setting, so we wanted to review that to make sure everybody understood procedures and protocols and what language to use. Kim also partnered with me to do a training on emergency mental health protocols and suicide safety assessments. We had a lot in the fall. We also had MPY come out and do a restorative justice training with administrators across the district and also all clinical staff. We hosted a convening with the Massachusetts School Mental Health Consortium and Mass Partnership for Youth in the fall over at the high school. We're also partnering with MPY again for a 2-part training with executive function and anxiety via Zoom. So we've done 1 part, we got the second part coming up after break. We also sent some clinical staff and are looking to expand to Think Kids collaborative problem solving training. We were awarded an SEL mental health grant, so we were able to use some of the grant funding to send clinical staff and administrators and some teachers to that training. So we'll be looking to expand on that later this school year and into next year. And then lastly, clinical staff use their early release days to do a self-paced training on restorative circles, which is a restorative justice practice intervention through Novak Education. So we've had a lot of opportunities that are really targeting the clinical skills that we need our clinicians to be equipped with. Okay.
ETP is our elementary transitions program. ETP is a short-term program designed to support students in adjusting to the school environment and developing linguistic survival skills and foundational social, emotional, and behavioral learning skills. Students who enter this program access assessment, intensive skill-based treatment, and programming developed by a multidisciplinary team. The students who accessed ETP presented with lagging skills across foundational readiness and social-emotional targets. Our criteria for entry included first, externalizing behaviors that include safety concerns to themselves or others. Some of these behaviors were elopement, environmental destruction, and aggression. The second was emerging behavioral health needs. The third being trauma, either known or assumed. And the fourth, other contributing factors. Our staffing included an academic coordinator who worked collaboratively with teachers and other professionals, a full-time clinician contracted from Shrewsbury Youth and Family Services, a clinical coordinator BCBA, and paraprofessional support. Given the cohort of students, there was also an English language teacher who provided EL instruction and collaborated with the academic coordinator. Pictured here is our academic coordinator with our students and paraprofessionals. We understood that to bring our students out of a fight or flight mode, we needed to start with environmental interventions. And this was imperative as a first step because our students could not access skill building when their brains were continually in this state. Our goal was to create a learning environment that promotes regulation by meeting basic needs such as food, rest, connection, and access to preferred items. It not only promotes regulation, but also decreases the motivation for a student to elope from the learning environment as it met all of their needs. Decreasing the elopement was imperative given across all of our students. Elopements were precursors to episode behavior, which presented as a safety risk to all involved and consumed large amounts of time and resources to de-escalate. After creating a therapeutic learning environment where their students wanted to be, this classroom was systematically shaped from just being regulation to the classroom looking and functioning like the classroom the students were preparing to re-enter. So they started by accessing play-based learning as a group, and then it was shaped up to a kindergarten adjacent schedule and expectations with a lot of academic rigor and center rotations to resemble the kindergarten classrooms that they were re-entering. In addition to the environmental interventions, there was skill building for each student, and that was imperative to prepare them to access learning in their classrooms. So each student was given an intake skill assessment, which through the observation identified the lagging skills, both behavior and social emotional. And we worked to explicitly teach and reinforce these skills in the first few weeks. And then as the foundational social emotional skills were built, we were able to target foundational academic readiness and linguistic skills. So the students access to skill building blocks per day using center rotations with our academic coordinator and English language teacher. Pictured here are our students with our incredible academic coordinator, Victoria Pescaro, and Rima Hanna, our EL teacher. We wanted to kind of go over a case study of some of what the data looked like. These are data from one student demonstrating overall trends of unsafe externalizing behaviors. So if you look at the graph, the dark line kind of indicates how the student was presenting prior to entering ETP. So a very high number of unsafe externalizing behaviors, mainly being episodes. That was the most remarkable change, was the overall decrease in episode behavior, which was combinations of all of the unsafe externalizing behaviors for a duration of time. So it was very important that we decrease those right away. And then the table demonstrates some averages pre-ETP and then during. So we took a lot of data in ETP, and we took adult support data. So if you look at this graph, the red line indicates behavioral support, where the blue line indicates engagement support. So behavioral support is support from an adult to prompting behaviors to remain regulated, and the engagement was to access learning. And the yellow line is independent, meaning that they accessed the given block independent of additional adult support. So the student may require both behavior and engagement support during any given block, but independent indicated there was the absence of those additional supports. So these data are student specific, but do represent overall trends across all students that we saw. What we saw immediately, if you can see, is kind of right away, the behavior support decreases and remains kind of low and stable, while they still required a high percentage of engagement support. So I just want to also note, I was in class recently with the student whose data these are representative of, and she was so excited to show me tapping out of CBC words. So it was just remarkable to see the growth and development. And lastly, here are just some of our amazing students enjoying recess and learning at Beale School. Our team reacted to a student need with a sense of urgency and compassion in order to support ETP students and families. As a result of this work, all of our students have transitioned back into the inclusion setting for the majority, if not all of their day, with fading adult support. And the smile will say it all. It's been amazing to watch their success and love for learning grow.
All right, so hard to top that, but we have one last piece. We have some updates regarding the Social Emotional Behavioral Academy. So we're in year 2 of a 3-year commitment. We are on the SEL mental health track. It is an academy that is a partnership between Department of Ed and also EDC. We have a technical assistant who is our liaison, who helps guide us through this process. And our goal is to assist and strengthen tiered interventions to promote effective and efficient social emotional behavioral supports universally across the entire district while being able to make data-driven decisions. So last year we spent a lot of our time looking at data, looking at our systems, what's going well, what do we need to grow on. And so we identified 4 priority areas coming out of last year that were our areas to grow and really focus on. So we've actually divided and conquered and had everyone that's been part of our group kind of divide into 4 different groups and really focus on some goal areas of how do we strengthen these areas and what are our recommendations moving forward for implementation for next year. So that was to strengthen Tier 2 systems, universalize data systems, and also to implement a universal student well-being team process across K through 12. So that's a process where we could proactively identify students requiring some additional social emotional support. And then we can also track progress with data systems as well. Redesigning and rethinking discipline and alternative remedies to discipline. And then lastly was looking at chronic absenteeism. So we'll head into year 3 of this academy, and we'll be looking to strengthen these systems and continue with some solid implementation. All right, so lastly, recommendations of where we're looking to move forward with the clinical department for the remainder of this year and into next year. So we're going to continue our universal mental health and SEL screeners, K through 12, and we're going to look to build capacity so we can increase the amount of screeners that we're doing across the district. We're going to look to continue to strengthen our social, emotional, and behavioral MTSS system. Some of that work will come from the SEB Academy work that we're doing. We will continue to offer professional development to clinical staff and also teachers and everybody else as well. But particularly with clinical staff, we're looking at being able to implement evidence-based practice, collaborative problem solving, CBT, restorative practices. Again, making sure that the clinicians are equipped with the clinical skill set that they need. As I mentioned before, we're going to continue that SEB work. I think what will be really great next year is to be able to report out on the implementation of those SWT teams and the data systems, so that when kids enter that MTSS triangle on the social, emotional, behavioral side, we have a streamlined process. And then lastly, we're going to look to plan, develop, and implement an elementary therapeutic program. So we've learned a lot through the ETP process. And as I had mentioned, we have a lot of needs across all the elementary schools. And so we're looking to build on the success. We've really done some outstanding work. The team has had some great growth with these students, and I think we've found some success. I wouldn't say it's a recipe that's going to work every single time, but I think it's a really great foundation. So we're going to look to build on that and be able to meet more needs of more students across elementary settings. So we're going to partner with Dr. Alex Hirschberg. He specializes in consultation on program development. So we're actually meeting with him in a few weeks as a team to talk about program development and what that's going to look like. And then we'll continue professional development and consultation with him as a team of the therapeutic programming into next fall as well. And he'll be able to come out and he'll be able to coach and consult with us so that we're making sure that we're doing this and we're doing it right. I think that's all we got.
Great, well, thank you. Questions, comments? Rachel?
First, I want to thank you for the report, and also for the work that each of you do every day. Meg Bartlett, Jamie, Nicole, our school adjustment counselors, our school psychologists, our clinical, this is hard work that you're doing. And it's emotionally taxing, but you show up every day and you're helping these students, and it's truly making a difference. I'm happy with the investments. I'm thankful for the investments that the district has made in mental health, because there's a connection between social, emotional, and behavioral health with academic success. So I'll start on a good note. Especially with the ETP program, this is like a huge positive. This is great, and there was so much success this year, and I'm really looking forward to seeing how the program expands and how we're able to help more students, especially at that elementary level. But this is also very heavy information, and it's hard to talk about, but it's important to talk about, as with all mental health. And when I looked at the report, especially right now where, it's critical in the schools to help intervene with students, especially when they're younger, because it's hard to get outside help right now. There's waiting lists, there's insurance issues, and with a lot of where kids are, you can't wait on it. It has to be addressed. And when I looked at this, and there's a lot of numbers, but there's students behind those numbers, and these are students that. There are the students that act out, and there is okay, we need to help that one. But there's a lot of kids that are in the background that are silent, and they're the ones that you don't necessarily think that there's something going on, but it's going to bubble up. So I'm happy that we have the tools, the screeners in place, and that it's important for families to know that when the students take these screeners, they do these surveys, that this isn't sitting on somebody's desk, that it's collecting dust until we get around to it, that you're actually looking at that, and when there's something that's triggered, those kids are dealt with that day. This is not something that, in a couple of months when a student has done something or has acted in a certain way, it's but we knew about that. We do, and you deal with it that day, if not quickly. So I think that's great, and it's also that we have other things in place for other students who, my middle schooler just went through the signs of suicide training, and she came home and she talked to us about it, and she took the handout that she has, and she has it in her room, and she was open about it, and she was like, well, now I sort of know what to look for. That's important, that you can have teammates that you think that they're fine because they're smiling, but they're actually struggling on the inside. So I'm glad that we have all of these things in place. But as we're supporting our students, we also need to be mindful of you and also the principals, the assistant principals, the classroom teachers, that as you've said, that we're seeing more behaviors at the elementary and the middle school level, maybe behaviors that certain people haven't seen before. And they go home, and it's you can't flip that switch that I had a really tough day and I'm processing something with a student that maybe they confided in them with information. You can't flip that switch and say, okay, well, I'm going to go home to my family, because you're carrying that with you. You're probably still thinking about all those students that you handled that day. So what supports do we have in place for your own mental health as well as the staff in buildings?
That's a great question, and thank you for acknowledging that. I think that is, we do really hard work, and we acknowledge that with our staff as often as possible and provide them, even something as simple as when we do department meetings, we meet about 5 times a year. I don't even start a meeting for the first half hour. I let them network and chat, and usually people bring breakfast, because we really want to create a cohesive and collaborative environment, so that they can lean on each other. Because I think that's part of it, with the team effort that we have here. It's important to have colleagues that you can lean on, because there are going to be some days that are really hard, and there's going to be some days that are really great and you have really great success, but there are a lot of hard days. Dr. Lazat also has a variety of wellness opportunities that we push out and we encourage folks to go to. Many of my staff have actually taken part in some of the mindfulness retreats. Pickleball has been a big hit, and that they talk about actually quite often about, I started a meeting of what's their win the day moment from the fall, and one of my staff was like, I started playing pickleball because she went to one of those wellness offerings, and she's like, I now play every week. So we talk about those things, and we try to encourage staff. We have the EAP, obviously options that we can push out, and I consult and support staff as often as we can. But it is difficult work, and we definitely need to make sure that we make staff a priority and their wellness, and not just the clinical department. I think so many people are touched by this.
John?
Yeah, thank you for the work that you do. We're very fortunate to have your expertise in our district. I felt the same way last year when you presented, and just reinforces the need. And I appreciate all the data that you shared as well, including all of those kind of charts, to kind of show what the impact of this support does for a lot of the students. When I look at the emergency response services data, it looks like the number of cases were like flat, right? Like it was 43 versus 44, but you did make a comment about the increase. There was an increase in elementary referrals, which I think were at 13. By how much roughly, like year over year?
I have the numbers here. So let's see. Looking back to last year, so we had 9 at the elementary level,
Okay.
22 at middle school, and 12 at high school.
Okay.
I think this year we are tracking data better.
Sure.
I think there's a little bit more integrity to our data, especially with our electronic health record system as well. And it gets a little tricky. Sometimes people double count students,
Right.
or if they've been referred multiple times. I think the difference that we felt this year is the intensity of the cases is very different. If I ran more data with August looking at like even 30+ encounters, we still have a handful of students in each of our buildings that are, those are daily touch points.
Yeah, no, the data is very helpful, including what you shared for the regional youth health survey to see, some positive trends there. But yeah, I would definitely encourage as you progress to, kind of see where those trends are,
Totally.
Year over year. I think it's super helpful. So
It was really encouraging when I look back and some of the data I inherited, looking at 73 from 2022. And I think some of that was the year prior to increasing clinical supports across the buildings. So staff are better equipped to safety plan, and so sometimes we can mitigate going to EMH because we safety plan and connect with parents, connect with outside providers if they have them. So there's other, proactive measures that we have. Obviously there's still a time and place when EMH is still going to be recommended.
absolutely. Here, thank you so much.
Lindsay?
Yeah, I so appreciate the work that your staff has done. I appreciate your calling it out and the need to sort of make sure that we're attending to them. And I also just want to acknowledge, we're running a not small clinical services division, right? This is a lot of people, right? And for folks who, went to high school 30 years ago and you think like, oh yeah, there was that like one person that like did a lunch bunch or something, right? Like it's just such a different level and sort of the size and the scope, you're running a program that is comparable in its size in terms of number of staff, just FTE alone, to a lot of outpatient mental health providers in our community. And so it's a big operation inside a really big and complex operation across lots of buildings, and so just wanted to kind of call that out. I have some questions as I try to understand it, and some of it is trying to always like understand the acronyms and what these things are, and I get better every year, and there's always more room to grow, growth mindset somewhere in here. So one of the things that you mentioned is a future recommendation is that we would want to continue to do sort of either more or maybe different screeners. And then when I looked in your report, there's also a lot of screeners happening, right, at a lot of different places that are screening for different things. I'm a huge proponent of it. I think it makes a ton of sense, and when you can do it sort of efficiently in the day and we can get good information and help kids earlier, I think a lot of those trends you're seeing are because of that. But maybe talk to me a little bit about what does that capacity look like? Sort of, is the capacity concern around sort of like time in building to do these things with kids? Is it about how whether there are screeners that can't be done on iPads and so we have to do paper-based, or is some of the capacity about having the clinical staff to do the follow-up? And maybe just talk a little bit more about that and what other areas you think like we're not touching right now, so why add another one?
Yeah, no, that's a really fair question. Kind of like all of the above, I guess.
Yeah, I'm sure.
But we would like to target younger kiddos, elementary age kiddos.
Yeah.
The difficult part is self-report screening tools are challenging, and you really don't get an accurate self-report till 3rd or 4th grade. A lot of the screening tools at that age are a lift on teachers. And so we're trying to be mindful of that as well. So that's part of it. A lot of it's done electronically at this point, which is great. I think the days, I shouldn't say that yet, but I think the days are over of the paper and like going through and crunching numbers and then putting it in a sheet. But it does become a lift, depending on who's, doing the screening. If kids are self-reporting, it's a much lighter lift in terms of analyzing the data and making sure that we can go through. Literally on screening days, usually, if I'm not in the building, I'm somewhere and I have the screens up and I'm sorting on the Google Sheets, pretty quickly, and then I'm able to color code and we're able to push that out to staff. So we've gotten the process down, I think, pretty good. The other piece is, making sure that we have the clinical staff to respond. With our psychologist holes that we've had to shuffle and fill this year, I think that's why we've been really mindful of trying to tackle on a new screener this year, plus all the other challenges that you guys are seeing with all the data that we've presented. It comes up quite a bit when I presented on universal screeners to SWAC, why don't we do 12th grade? And really the only answer I have, which is not a good one, is just they don't take health. So I think that's something we need to think about for next year. In my last district, we did screen seniors, and then it's like finding a good time to screen a senior who's super stressed about the college application process and what happens after high school. So there's a lot of thought that needs to go into that. But it is an area that we do want to look to tackle, because we don't want to leave that left before kids go out and graduate from here. Because if we can offer them support and resources before they leave Shrewsbury High School, we want to do that too.
Right.
Can I just follow up with
please.
while we're on this? Because we are collecting the data, we're having the screening, but it's that analysis piece that takes time and to figure out what does it all mean and then what is the best course of action. Do you feel that there's enough staff doing that component of it? Real deep dive into that.
Yeah, it typically falls on the leadership team to look at the numbers. I'm not asking staff to do that. They're really in the trenches doing the follow-up. I think one component that we've added that has, increased our capacity in terms of what do we provide kids, when we do a screener. Because the other piece is like, well, what are you going to do with the information?
Right.
You don't just
Right.
screen kids to collect data. You screen
Right.
kids to identify them and then provide an intervention. So Interface is a great resource that we can have that conversation. Like I said, the trusted adult intervention is huge. I think that's just nice to say, I'm now your trusted adult if you don't have one. And then we've also increased the capacity of those CBT Tier 2 groups, which, I'll be honest, sometimes it's a hard sell for middle school kids. Sometimes they're like, no thank you to a group. But the ones that do are like, this is awesome. And it's the most bang for your buck. You get 10, 12 kids in front of you and you can provide this really awesome intervention and you build their toolbox. And these are lifelong skills these kids are going to utilize. So that, in terms of a response, we now have another tool that we can offer. But we also want to make sure too, when we screen kids, we have a lot of kids that get screened at the high school with that BSAD screener. But we have the school counselors also helping as well, because we want to make sure people have the time to do that as well. Because if we have kids coming up with safety concerns, we got to make sure we respond within that day.
Great, thank you. Go ahead, Lindsay.
No, it's I think you and I are on the same track here. That the bringing the level of professionalism is amazing, and it also requires a lot more work and sort of like administrative backbone, right? And so saying we want to be bringing more evidence-based practices sounds awesome, and then you're like, well, it's a lot of professional development, and then it's a lot of data tracking. Your data sheet, that is like looking at an EKG, right? And it means something to you because you've been trained to know what that means. It is not clear to others. You told me that lines are going in the right direction, and I believe you, but that's because of the background that you have, right? And that, like, okay, the colors go up or down, and they're all supposed to go in different directions, right? So that I'm so appreciative of the, I'm gonna go back to just say, we're not for the override, we're not for our investment, we wouldn't be where we are today, and I think the trends are moving very much in the right direction. My questions all stem from a concern that while we're moving in the right direction, we're not where we want to be, right? And so what are some of the next steps? If I can ask you, you had your one about emergency response data. I want to just make sure I understand. I think it's your slide 20, which is you can go back. Sure, let's go back to it. To just make sure I'm understanding and like the community understands, I have to imagine that this is the one with lots of blue and orange. You're like, oh, there. Wow, very impressive. Okay, is it fair to say this is, so we have lots of things can be an emergency response, and kids and families can have lots of different outcomes. Obviously, a 51A can be filed irrespective of whether a kid also goes to inpatient, right? And so they can appear multiple times in the data, or an incident, I guess, is that right? And I guess what I don't always understand about how we characterize emergency mental health and then youth mobile crisis, and part of it is like, is the kid moving or not moving, and like where is that happening is sometimes a little confusing. But for the kids who end up, young people, sometimes very, very young kiddos, who end up in either inpatient or partial hospitalization, would they all have been screened by emergency mental health? Like, do you have to go through the orange box to kind of bar to get to one of the higher level interventions for the most part?
Typically, yes. It may not be a recommendation from school staff, so we wouldn't have that data. So it could be like an outside provider, it could be parents bring them on their own. PCP recommends it, because sometimes parents follow up with their primary care doctor and then they'll send them to EMH. So we wouldn't be able to capture necessarily with validity, right, all of that information. This is just what was a recommendation from school staff. But to answer your original question, yes.
Okay.
I would say 90% of the time, that usually is what the case is.
Okay.
We're not necessarily, as school staff, making referrals to partials or
Sure.
inpatient. Some, outpatient therapists may be able to do that in their capacity, but as school staff, we're not typically making those referrals.
And I guess I'm wondering a little bit about the data and the feedback loop. Obviously, as we get to middle and particularly high school, we have a lot of kids in either inpatient or partial hospitalization. And so these are only the kids that then have some recommendation of a school employee at the appropriate level, of course. But do we not also get data where we learn that a young person has been hospitalized, right? It might come later through Felicity, and now we're doing a coordination and thinking about, how to reenter that young person. So I'm just wondering if this data, is it just the point in time at the point of emergency? Or do you get, you have later data points that come in?
So the inpatient and partial hospitalization data points, we may learn about that even if we didn't make the referral to EMH. So
Okay.
those are encompass kind of all
All.
that we are aware of, which I would say most we are aware of, because we do reentry meetings and we help transition families and students back into school. I will also note with those two data points, just systemically from a mental health perspective, inpatient is really rare, like under the age of 11. There just are not a lot of facilities that service that age group. So, we do have a few that have occurred, under the age of 11, and there's very few facilities that will take a referral for that young of a kiddo.
Right.
So beds are few and far between.
I'm sorry.
No,
folks.
that's fine.
I know this may be really obvious to you, but from someone saying the outside, I am curious as to why our data about level of service and our 51As are together on the same slide. Like why that's important to you. So help me understand why. Like, is it that often that, maybe because of the experience that happened in the school, obviously we have to file on ourselves sometimes because we're concerned about supervision or something like, but why have you presented it this way versus, obviously kids who have experienced potential traumas in their home setting, we should all be concerned about that. It may be an important piece of the behavior profile, but why is it linked in this way of like, it's in the emergency response?
And that's a really great question, and a fair point that a 51A doesn't always. It could happen by itself. It could happen in conjunction with other kind of data points that you see here. They kind of all fall under our emergency response spectrum, I guess, of intervention.
Yep.
Obviously, a kid who's requiring a transport to EMH is on a very different end of the spectrum versus filing a 51A. But sometimes 51As are requiring a high level of follow-up as well, where we are having to loop in the police department, for well-being checks, or we're having DCF workers come out to the school and doing, assessments immediately. It really all depends on the severity of the situation, but they all kind of fall under that umbrella. But they can look very different. It's kind of like a spectrum, I think, of, in terms of response and in how large of a safety concern it can be. But some of the 51As that we've had to file have been significant safety concerns. And we've had pretty serious interventions that have had to take place, like I said, in conjunction with school staff, DCF, and sometimes Shrewsbury Police Department as well.
Okay. I'm nearing my end. I certainly think that the ETP program and moving that and sort of, stabilizing that, thinking about the program design was, as I think just about, I remember an early question, Dr. Story, that we had is sort of like, where do you house it? Because you have 5 elementary schools versus middle school and high school, it's sort of easy, right? Like, we have to find a space in the building, and sometimes that's actually very hard, but all the kids are sort of in one space, and obviously at the elementary level, you have to deal with kids, this is not where their buses go to, and all these other things. But, I guess I'm wondering too, as you've transitioned Nicole into that, from that clinical coordinator position, do we have enough capacity of clinical coordinators to have kids who aren't necessarily at that level, but your clinical coordinator caseload, it's probably not where I want it to be, and that worries me, and so I'm just wondering, is that a place for some potential future investments that, because we've decided to move, one role to kind of dedicate there, do we need some more capacity across the rest of the, particularly elementary level? Am I asking a question that makes sense?
Yes,
Okay.
so in,
And I'm also slightly forgetting what we funded in the budget, but I'm just gonna put that aside for a second.
in the student services budget report,
Yeah.
we did recommend an additional clinical coordinator.
Okay,
For the therapeutic program, we're recommending a teacher as well as an adjustment counselor for the program with additional clinical coordinator support.
okay. So there would be another one in the.
So
in
we're
the whole-
recommending one more additional clinical coordinator across the district. And then what we'll do is support the therapeutic program with that additional FTE,
Okay, thank
if
you.
that makes sense.
Not solely, though.
Not solely, correct.
And I think, and just maybe for clarification, in terms of Nicole, as students have been able to re-enter the general education piece, you've been able to fade your support, I'm assuming, of the program, and you're working with other caseloads across other populations of students as that's shifted. It was very intense in the fall, and over time, you've been able to fade the support that you're providing to that particular group of kids, is my understanding, right?
Yes, what started as very intensive clinical support now is more consultation between academic coordinator and classroom teacher to make sure the learning environment is optimal for student success. And yes, I've been able to
Okay.
support other students as well.
Great, thanks, thank you.
And while we're talking about the ETP program, it's a huge thank you, because this became an issue pretty quickly, and there was, what are we going to do? Services need to be provided, and Megan, your whole team really worked fast to put something in place that has been very successful in a short amount of time. And to me, it's a very proactive approach, not like waiting. We had resources, thank goodness, like Lindsay said, due to their prior override and adding, thank goodness. We didn't know this was going to happen, but having things in place that we could react, but there was a lot of work to get that done, so that's a huge thank you. And going forward, we've got this model that we can work off of and tweak as we need, but I think it's a great thing to have for the district. And since I've been doing it, this is the first year that I've been alarmed more about the level of intensity and the numbers of students, and the numbers that need these intensive care, but the numbers don't really reflect the amount of time and the complexity that you're all dealing with at such young ages. And again, to me, that was it's alarming what we're seeing in society right now around that, and it's not easy work. And we need to do it to help those students, but also to help our teachers and the other students who are in the classroom so that they're able to access educational services in a manner that we have to do for all students. So it's a lot right now, and I give you a lot of credit for everything you're doing. I did have a couple of questions. How do we dovetail with families? So if there's identification, and do we dovetail with families, private providers? Because there could be, we're helping in the schools, but we're also they're helping at home. Is there coordination with families around these services?
We lean on Interface a lot in terms of like referrals for outside services. Is that what you're referring to?
Well, they may be doing something at home. There may be some services at home that are being provided through private providers, but we're also doing some things within the school day. Is there interaction between the two to discuss and make sure that we're all on the same page?
Yeah, the wraparound approach is really important. Whenever we have a meeting with a parent after, a challenging behavior, or we're just proactively trying to, support a student, releases, or like I encourage all my staff, get releases for all the players on this child support team. And it's really important that we have consistent communication. So, simply we're using the same language, in sessions can be really helpful. And then sometimes our staff we do have kind of care coordination meetings with all the other players as well. Zoom makes that really accessible these days,
Right.
which is great. So a lot of the staff do take that, as part of their kind of case management of a student. But that is absolutely a huge, it can be a huge lift in terms of that case management piece, but it's also really important to make sure we're keeping people connected too. Sometimes what you see in school for student behavior looks very different at home.
Right.
So we want to make sure we're communicating that across all settings.
Great, thanks. And my other question, if a child is screened and there's an identified maybe for, suicidal ideation or something is happening, how do we involve the parents? What is are parents called, since they're minors, how does that all work as well?
Yeah, parents are notified. I think it looks a little bit different based on age level. The high school kids we're including in the process a little bit more. We let them know we're going to be calling home, but it feels a little bit different. We want them to have some autonomy and feel like they have some control over the situation. With the elementary kiddos, it's obviously really concerning when we're having those thoughts at such a young age, and parents are looped in pretty quickly. Staff were also trained on utilizing some screening tools to assess for safety, so that we have, essentially a score. We're checking some boxes so that we can provide that information to parents. We can provide that information if we have them go to Youth Mobile or EMH. They can take that screener with them, or they can take it to the primary care doctor as well. But yeah, parents are notified because they are minors, and it's a safety issue. Typically best practices when you sit down with a kid doing a screening is you talk about the limits of confidentiality immediately. Obviously, like I said, that conversation feels very different with a high schooler versus a first or second grader. But we talk about that right up front, and we say, like, not just are we going to have to let your parents know, we might have to let other people know too, if you're unsafe. So kids are made aware of that pretty quickly in the process as well.
Great, thank you. And thank you for everything you do. It's definitely not easy work, but thank goodness we have all of you to do it. Dr. Sawyer?
Thank you. It's enormously important work and impactful work that our clinical team is doing. I want to commend first Ms. Belcito for having the foresight and advocating for additional resources, including Ms. Millett's position, which we're benefiting from tremendously in terms of the coordination of this work. And I know just from this report last year and this year, you can tell that. In terms of the quality of all these different pieces, it's a very complex scenario that we're dealing with right now in terms of across the various demands of student mental and behavioral health. But I think the fact that it's multi-pronged, we're talking about building staff's capacity at the same time of implementing tools that we can use to screen or to intervene. And we're building systems as well. And that's been a big theme of what we've been doing both academically but also on this side. And I think that we have some parallel work happening around multi-tiered systems of support that are really important. We're accessing really good resources from the state or providers for expertise, consultation with Dr. Kuziak. I mean, all these things, a lot of these practices have been in place for a long time, but I think they're all really kind of gelling into a very strong, comprehensive approach and program, and that's really important. And it couldn't be more important just given the challenges that we're facing right now. And I think that the committee members, certainly highlighted the variety of things. So I want to certainly thank Ms. Belcito, Ms. Millett, everyone involved in the clinical team, and certainly, as Ms. Millett said, all of our staff members have participated in some way or another. That trusted adult sometimes can be a paraprofessional, or it could be an athletic coach, or it can be their English language arts teacher. It really depends. But I think there's even better coordination than I've ever seen in my time in the district between the clinical team and other folks. And, at the same time, you mentioned it, I mean, our principals and assistant principals, they're right there working as a team with these folks, especially when on the behavioral health kinds of issues as well. So it's really, I'm very proud of the work that's happening. And certainly the elementary transition program is a huge success. A lot of hard work. I want to commend Ms. Bradley and everybody who's been associated with it for the work that they did to get that up and running, and just to see, it's so gratifying to see how well it's worked and to support our students. Right away, our liaison with the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, when learned what we were doing, wanted all the info because she wanted to disseminate this to other districts who are working with a lot of the same challenges around students who have gone through, who are homeless and in shelters across the state. We know this is a crisis that is happening across the state and the nation. So, really kudos. It wasn't mentioned that Ms. Bradley is a proud alumna of Shrewsbury High School and Shrewsbury Public Schools. Including, we were both at Floral Street School back in the day, right, Ms. Bradley? So we're really proud that she's come back to us. And also, I know that in one of the previous presentations, there was a photo of her with her husband, who's on our local police force, doing, I think it was on Community Reading Day with that. So it's been, we're really pleased. It's a good example, and Ms. Belcito and I just we had meetings the last few days of appointing some, including 2 really excellent new school psychologists for next year. The quality of what we're seeing, and those were due to the work that Ms. Millett did in leading those searches. That's the example of what having the director position enables us to do and help amplify everybody's work in a positive way. So I couldn't be more grateful. And really thank you for a very thorough report and answering everyone's questions. And thank you for all the work that you're doing. Much appreciated.
Thank you again.
Thank you.
Okay, next, we were going to have our clinical services report, but that's being postponed to a later meeting. So we're going to move right on under finance and operations. Mr. Girardi, our assistant superintendent for finance and operations, is here to give us an update on the fiscal year '24 budget.
All right, good evening. It's a really fun time in the world of budget. I'm air traffic controller. As we're prepping the fiscal year '25 budget for a sound takeoff fairly soon, we're managing the landing of the FY24 budget, starting to look at our landing gear and bringing FY24 budget down. And an important thing is to look at the trends and patterns that we're learning from the current fiscal year to really help us inform the fiscal year '25 budget as it prepares for takeoff. So I think it's a nice well-timed opportunity. We're 75% of the way through our fiscal year, 9 out of the 12 months wrapped up at the end of March, and we're just over 2/3 of the way through the school year. So a nice opportunity to take a look, to learn, and to make sure that we're setting ourselves up nicely for an end of the fiscal year '24 budget. The way that we do this is we report out from there's 19 high-level categories that we report out, and this is connected with our end-of-year report that we do after the fiscal year. We spend the month of July, August, and September putting together a comprehensive package of how all of our funds that are spent over the course of a fiscal year, whether they be appropriated funds, if they're from the town, grants, whatever they may be, we report out all expenditures to the state, and they run an audit each year to make sure that we're doing our due diligence with the funds that are provided to us. So I'll jump right in just to the big picture first. So based on expenditure data to date and the encumbrances through the end of the fiscal year, including updated projections, we're currently projecting a slightly more than 0.5% positive variance, about just over $460,000 or 0.56%, which in an $83 million budget, we're feeling really strong about where we're standing at the end of March, beginning of April. To take a look at each of the categories, they're set up in different ways. Our A categories are our staffing categories, B are our transportation categories, C are our tuitions, and D is our material supplies, contracted services, and other pieces there. So in our A1 category, which is administration, central office folks, principals, and our Unit B, including our athletic director, we're about 1.5% under the projected budget for the year. We're basically on pace. Given the cost, the overall cost of this category, we're right where we want to be, slightly under, due to some changes in positions, some folks moving on who were there for many years, and some younger folks, including myself, coming in at slightly a different salary rate. Our Unit A, teachers and nurses, again, just under 1% under. Again, in a category where this is a really big chunk of the budget, one of the largest slices of the pie. It's a highly stable category, trending slightly under, again, based on personnel activity, leaves, resignations, and such. A3 category are aides and paraprofessionals, ABA technicians. We're 4.8% under currently. Again, we've been trending at this rate through the year due to personnel turnover and vacancies. A4 category are secretaries, technology, and other non-represented staff, 1.7% over. Again, it's a category that is not as dollar heavy as, say, the Unit A teachers, so the percentages are a little, the variance is a little bit different. Slight increases due to, we have some payroll retirements that we've adjusted some training time to make sure that we're getting the new staff in and trained appropriately. This also includes some IT overtime, and we hired some additional courier services over the summer to close out our warehouse. Our substitutes, which are our daily substitutes, long-term nurse substitutes, we're 6% under. These are actual and projected costs through the remainder of the school year. Again, we're going to keep an eye on this category because as we head into the final trimester of school, there tend to be reasons why substitute activity can't increase with end-of-year activities, graduations, fourth grade celebrations, whatever they might be. So we'll keep an eye on that, but currently it's trending at a pretty positive place. And this is a category where we made adjustments last year as we were landing the plane last year, and we realized that we needed to make some adjustments to account for different practices with our substitute needs. What it's showing is those adjustments were pretty well planned and projected to get us through the school, through a school year in a positive place. A6, which is other wages category, we're on pace. These are some wages such as professional development and some other things, some extra stipends for staff services. Our employee benefits, we're just slightly over 1%. Again, this is just a forecast of our, I think primarily our sick leave sellback for retiring educators and what we projected for the year with a slight variance over. Moving on to our B category, we have our regular education and vocational transportation. We're 4% over. I'll speak to this category a little bit more specifically in a few minutes. We're in a good place with our regular education transportation and our contract with AA Transportation. Where we are seeing variances are with our McKinney-Vento transportation, our homeless and foster care transportation that was mentioned earlier and does have an impact on this category. Our special education transportation, we're trending 2.2% over. This is slightly over due to higher rates. Some of these rates have kind of materialized and kind of come back to order a bit in the second half of the school year. We knew that they were pretty volatile in the first half of the school year. They're still trending over, but at least they've subsided a bit, and our transportation contracts are better known at this point than they were earlier in the year for some of those individual providers. Moving on to our special education tuitions and our vocational tuitions, our C category, trending slightly over in our special education tuitions due to fluctuations of the census of our students in and out in our out-of-district placements, including newly eligible students. Again, that's You know, as you can see, it's roughly under $100,000 over if you look at the fiscal year budget update in a, you know, just over $7 million budget projection with a lot of potential fluctuation. We're sitting at a pretty good spot in end of March, beginning of April, with those special education tuitions. Vocational and recovery high school tuitions, we did have a few students, 2 students who were accepted into Assabet for the final trimester of the school year. We adjusted our numbers for this year. We're still trending under what we budgeted for vocational tuitions for FY24. Our D category, we tend to lump these together because they're kind of a moving target throughout the course of the year, depending on where POs are landing and sitting on people's desks and what's been procured at that time. One thing I will point out here, you know, we're projecting on budget, we're expecting to come out with a net zero expenditure for each of these categories, but just how some of the things shape up over the course of the school year. We're running over by 7% with our contracted services, as was shared earlier, where we're having some savings with our educators, you know, the school psychologists and other folks who would provide evaluations. We have to find contracted services to provide those evaluations. Those dollars land elsewhere. So that's what we're keeping an eye on. But in the remainder of our DA categories, things are running as expected. So just to speak to a few other pieces of our budget, our circuit breaker fund, we began FY24 with a fund balance of just over $3.4 million on account. This was the maximum allowable carry forward from FY23. And that's what we're targeted to carry forward at the close of this fiscal year, which is $2.63 million. This is considered a strong reserve to achieve our financial goals and reduce budgetary risk given the volatility of out-of-district tuition costs, increases, and other potential needs. Special education out-of-district tuitions are now projected above budget, again by just under $100,000 due to new and changed placements and anticipated new costs, some of which are related to student mental and behavioral health issues. With the current overall positive variance for the appropriated budget, this projected overage in this category would not require additional use of circuit breaker funding at this time, as is offset by, you know, the positive variances in the other categories. Another place where we're starting to land the plane is with our COVID funding. So our ESSER 1 and ESSER 2 grants that began during the height of COVID, those deadlines have come and gone, and we expended all monies that were appropriated to the Shrewsbury Public Schools. We are, again, landing the plane with our ESSER 3, which ends on September 30th of 2024. We've expensed, at this point, 91% with some other dollars that are earmarked for that. And we feel very confident that by that September 30th deadline, that we'll have expended 100% of ESSER 3 funding. Our emergency homeless grants, we continue to educate 52 students that are identified as emergency shelter students. I think we saw a slide where there were 58 students who were living at the shelter. 52 of those students are what we identify as emergency homeless through the state that we receive funding for.
And that's because, Mr. Girardi, some of those students are actually being educated back in other districts.
We're being educated back in other districts, and there are a handful of students that are living there that are not in the state emergency program. So the 2 funding mechanisms that we have is we have a homeless emergency support grant that provides $1,000 for each student for startup costs. And then, you know, that those funds have been procured by the state, they've been granted by the state, and we have put them into use and are currently putting them into use. And then we have an expanded homeless shelter funding program, and that is what we call the $104 per student per day for the time that they're enrolled in our district. So that started at the beginning of the school year. We did our first filing on November 30th, and then we just did our second filing on March 31st. And we're estimating about $900,000 over the course of the FY24 for those 52 eligible students. So that our payments are coming in kind of tri-annually at about $300,000, just over $300,000. These are reimbursement. They are carried forward into next year. So again, as we're landing one plane and getting the next ready for takeoff, we are being very thoughtful as to how those funds are being expensed, with the unknown as to whether or not this $104 per day per student will carry forward beyond FY24. Another place that I'd like to, bring to light with our FY24 budget is our McKinney-Vento homeless transportation. Again, McKinney-Vento, it is in our regular education line item. This reimburses transportation for homeless students at a percentage for, homeless students whose home district is Shrewsbury but live outside of Shrewsbury, or vice versa, if they live outside of Shrewsbury but they're being bused into Shrewsbury to one of our schools. So these funds are reimbursed by the state, and they trail until the following fiscal year, although there's some conversation at the state level about making that come sooner. But those funds go directly to the town's general fund, not the school's general fund. And though expenses are paid through, the school, and that's even though we're paying, the school district is paying for the McKinney-Vento transportation. What we budgeted for FY24 before we knew we'd have a web of transportation running across central Massachusetts was just over $81,000. As of the end of March, we're projecting just under $300,000 in McKinney-Vento expenses. Projecting about $209,000 over our budgeted amount. And again, some percentage of this will be reimbursed directly to the town or in fiscal year 25, or potentially sooner. So overall, we're running at 0.5% in the positive for an $83 million budget. We will fully expend our FY24 general fund appropriation. In the meantime, we're going to continue to monitor all costs and update our projections during the final third of the year, particular attention to student needs, especially potential out-of-district placements, staffing, transportation, contracted services, IT, and cybersecurity. As far as our D category, we're beginning to close out our purchase orders for the current fiscal year. We've signaled a deadline of this Friday for our DLT folks and other folks who are writing POs to start to close out, their budget for the school year for a few reasons. One, so that we can place those orders, get them delivered and inventoried before we all break for the summer. But it also gives us a much clearer understanding of how much money, of the appropriated budget we have moving towards June 30th. So with that, if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Thank you. Questions or comments? Lindsay, go ahead. Sure.
Because I'm just trying to remember the plan for the little bit of funds that remain, and I want to get the name right. The ESSER 3, we've only 91% of that. I know it's has been encumbered. We have a deadline coming up about 5 months from now. Was the plan similar to past years to use some of that for some of our summer programming, or what is the plan for the other 9%?
Sure. So that's how it was initially earmarked, and you had made the decision that would be the best use of funds at the time. There's been conversation, and we'll come to you if that changes. But what we're seeing, or what Ms. Clowder and her team are seeing is, or the question is, could those funds be better used during the course of the school year when we have all the students with us, as opposed to operating a summer program that may not be receiving all the students that are the students that we want to be there. That's still to be decided, but that's one question that we have as we approach the summertime.
I would expect that later this spring we'll come to you for a final revision, and that to utilize the remaining funds to offset costs of maintaining the additional literacy tutor hours that we've added.
Okay.
So that we can finance those additional hours through next year as well. We'll have to be clear about how we would do that because the money has to be expended by September. So likely what we would do is recommend expending those funds on something that's allowable, that can be closed out by September, that would then offset the additional
Yep.
wages for the additional tutor hours that we can maintain through next year. And I think that, as you know from one of the updates you had from Ms. Cloud and that team, I think we have some really effective work happening right now in terms of literacy interventions, and we think that maintaining that for the next school year is probably a better leverage of those funds and the way to utilize those to close things out. So, but we'll come with some specifics, I would say probably in the mid to late May or early June timeframe as we firm up those plans and exactly what the mechanism would look like. But, they've been excellent. The budget for next year for FY25 is going to assume some of the costs that we have been expensing to the ESSER 3 funds. There's an adjustment counselor at the high school that will come into the appropriated budget. The late bus program will come into the appropriated budget. Those are the two really examples of things that were not, that were positions that, or services that we had to decide whether we'd continue them. Most of the other things were expensed on Summer Academy the last couple of years, as well as those additional tutor hours and the like that were more extra services during the post-pandemic environment.
And obviously the sensitivity around COVID dollars and wanting to make sure it's $110,000 in a very complicated budget, and so it's, but I just want to make sure we don't get too close to our deadlines and have a good plan that we've clearly communicated. And I know you have a ton of hoops for all of these programs, right, to jump through. So let's give ourselves the time to make the right decision, Dr. Sawyer. And obviously, literacy is a place that clearly COVID pushed us in the wrong direction, and so investments there I think seem well justifiable, but. I'll keep every $100,000 that we can get, right? So, thank you for the update.
Yeah.
Anyone else? No. Chris, just a question around the McKinney-Vento. I know it's trailing. When do we know the percentage? Is it when they finally reimburse, or do we know the percentage ahead of time? How does that work?
Sure, it's a pretty interesting question, kind of, I think, given current,
It's not the answer you
the
want.
environment,
Finance person.
right?
It's
The
interesting.
environment.
It's a state budget question.
It's a state budget question, and I think, we're not alone in looking at numbers like this and wondering how they're going to be reimbursed. So the question I have is, historically, full reimbursement is the expectation.
Right.
Is there funding at the state and federal levels that will allow for that? That's a question that I think remains
To be determined.
to be determined.
Right.
And I think what I alluded to earlier was they are looking, they're hearing from their school districts that this money was not, budgeted for our current fiscal year. We're sitting in a place where we might be able to offset some of these funds in other places, thankfully, but there are many districts who may not be able to and are really struggling to cover these costs within this fiscal year. So the state is looking at different opportunities to push this money out sooner, meaning within the current fiscal year. And however that gets, those monies are absorbed by the town budget and then decided how they're going to be used, I think will kind of come at a town-by-town decision.
Okay. I think that just leads to my comment around the emergency shelter grant in FY25 and concern around that 104 per pupil from what we're hearing at the state level with revenue concerns. So I think as we move into this next budget, that's for me is a concern, because these are services we need to provide, but it does cost, it's expense, and we're hoping to get the full reimbursement this year, but I think FY25 is a question mark.
It's a question mark.
Yeah, definitely. Okay. Dr. Sawyer?
Just want to thank Mr. Girardi for the very thorough report and the information, and appreciate that we're still trending in the right place. You know that the FY25 budget plan includes an expectation in terms of hitting the target around circuit breaker reserve is to use $400,000 of a positive variance from this year and sort of push it through the circuit breaker mechanism into that reserve. Where it's looking very likely we'll be able to do that, and that's the plan. remains the plan based on this. Again, 0.5%, looking at all the different pieces, how can we be as thoughtful as possible in terms of managing our expenditures this last quarter of the fiscal year and setting ourselves up as much as possible for being on solid ground to start the next fiscal year. So, but appreciate the report, and we'll update you again in June for sort of the final budget transfers as we do each year.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, next we have our minutes from our school committee workshop held on March 20th and the school committee meeting held on March 27th, 2024. Any changes or corrections? Nope, there being none, these can be marked as accepted as distributed. And we do need to go into executive session this evening for the purpose of addressing Massachusetts General Law, Chapter 30A, Section 21A7, to comply with or act under the authority of any general or special law or federal grant in aid requirements. Purpose 7, Open Meeting Law, Massachusetts General Law, Chapter 30A, Section 22FG, for the purpose of reviewing, approving, and/or releasing executive session minutes. B, for the purpose of addressing Massachusetts General Law, Chapter 30A, Section 21A3, to discuss strategy with respect to collective bargaining or litigation if an open meeting may have a detrimental effect of the bargaining or litigating position of the public body, and the chair so declares. Purpose 3, the Shrewsbury Education Association Units A and/or B, the Shrewsbury Paraprofessional Association, and/or the Cafeteria Workers Association. And C, for the purpose of addressing Massachusetts General Law, Chapter 30A, Section 21A2, to conduct strategy sessions in preparation for negotiations with non-union personnel, or to conduct collective bargaining sessions or contract negotiations with non-union personnel, non-union clerical and support staff, and/or administrators. Purpose 2, where deliberation in an open meeting may have a detrimental effect on the bargaining position of the public body, and we will return to open session only for the purpose of adjourning for the evening. May I have a motion that we adjourn to executive session?
So moved.
Second.
Roll call vote is required. Ms. Shreveport?
Aye.
Mr. Wensky?
Aye.
Ms. Heffernan?
Aye.
Myself, aye. Thank you and good night.